Contractor Charles Littlejohn apologized in court, saying he wanted to show how little the wealthy paid in tax. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to one count of unauthorized release of tax returns. Though thousands of other documents were released, other than former President Trump's taxes, including Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott's, he said outside court they were targeted because they were conservative and wealthy.
In a broad sense, every American is a victim here. Why? Because this case is part of the ongoing and dangerous corruption of the justice system at the federal level.
The federal judge said Littlejohn attacked democracy when he targeted a sitting president and that she had no words over the fact that he was charged with just one count. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying a lower court must indeed hear a challenge to the constitutionality of a decades-old state law that limits the use of Medicaid dollars to cover the cost of abortions. The high court's majority saying on Monday that prior court decisions did not fully consider the breadth of state constitutional protections against discrimination. The lawsuit brought by Planned Parenthood said the 1982 law unconstitutionally discriminates against poor women. I'm Ted Lindner. This is Fox News.
Yikes! Are those expensive credit card bills arriving? Well, we can help. Bank Pacific has launched our New Year's Resolution Solution personal loan with annual percentage rates as low as 7.49%. When to pay off your credit cards or for whatever you want, starting at 7.49% APR. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com and come join us. We're still celebrating. Equal credit opportunity lender. Conditions apply. Happy New Year.
Hafa-day, Alex Dimapon here from Security Title. Title reports, escrow forms, signatures, statements, and title insurance. When it comes to buying, selling, or refinancing your property, we do it all for you. At Security Title, we enjoy watching your dreams come true and being the ones to make sure it happens just as you planned. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Hi, this is Jerry Roberts. What's happening in the workplace? What about your job and career? What ideas will find their way into your world? That's what you get with The Extra Point every day on The Ray Gibson Show here on 93.3 FM. Sometimes it's about what's in the news, or working relationships, or how to get further and do better. I try to make it interesting, inspiring, and hopefully sneak a little fun in too. Be a part of it. 7:25 weekday mornings. The Extra Point, brought to you by First Hawaiian Bank.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Here we go. Today is not Red Shirt Monday, so I thought I'd wear an orange shirt today, Jose.
I see that.
Yeah, do you like this shade of orange?
It's a very good shade of orange.
You know, shirt colors are kind of like sex and gender. It can be any color you want it to be. The objective facts and the truth have nothing to do with it. If you want your rice to be red, it's red. Okay, so let's see. We don't have any Zemi Akotny today, so I'm going to proceed a little farther on this article that I started called The American Crack-Up by David Samuels that ran in a website called Unheard. And you'll recall how this op-ed starts out with talking about all the crazy things that are going on in our country about men being women and Kotex in the men's room and jock straps in the ladies' room and all of these other silly things. And at the same time, America is still a great country. And how can two countries, two really totally different countries exist in the same geography? And the answer was elites. And that's where I'm going to pick up here. America's callow hothouse elites plainly lack either the temperament or necessary language or experiment to deal with the social and economic reality they face, let alone the yawning social divisions engendered by 50 years of laissez-faire economics accompanied by the growth of surveillance and censorship technologies. Lacking any real understanding of the new technologies that have fundamentally transformed the American social and economic structure, or how those technologies and new concentrations of wealth are reshaping the lives of ordinary people, they seek to cast the country's ever-expanding range of social problems in the only language they understand, which is race, and to haughtily and self-righteously dismiss everyone who disagrees with them as bigots. Yeah, and I've run into this myself, you know. I go back and quote Justice Harlan's dissent in Plessy, the 1896 case that said that a Louisiana statute that said that the black race and the white race had to ride in separate railroad cars. And Justice Harlan said, no, the Constitution is colorblind, and the government has no business knowing what anyone's race is. When I bring up the historical fact, you know what the lefties will tell me? That's racist, Bob.
How dare you?
The unending stream of obvious policy failures that American elites have authored, both domestic and foreign, from the country's immigration, income, and education crises to its failures in the Middle East and Ukraine, can hardly be blamed on old-fashioned bigots, of whom there are thankfully few left in Washington. In reality, the identity-based vitriol of the country's political, academic, and media elites is not shared by most normal Americans who actually have to live with each other on a daily basis, which in turn suggests that the national obsession with race and group identity is a tool being employed from the top down to fracture the possibility of democratic opposition to large concentrations of wealth and the rule by bureaucrats. So here's what they're saying. There are these elites who set themselves up on the top of our institutions and have profited immensely from that. And as a matter of self-protection, they have launched cultural Marxism to keep the masses properly divided so that they won't be subject to someone who says, who the hell do these people think they are? Let's get rid of them. In other words, the wokeism that we're seeing today is a protection device, according to this article, brought about by the elites, the Harvards, the Yales, all of the folks that are saying these ridiculously silly things. As the fearful servants of the fearful oligarchy, America's elites don't trust the people they rule. It's no surprise, then, that one thing that most of the social innovations of the past 5 years, from open borders to the new language of race to the attack on meritocracy, have in common is that no one voted for them. When major shifts in elite ideas contradict existing laws, American substantial leaders have learned that ignoring these contradictions is the smart move, lest one finds one's own elite status revoked or canceled. I'm going to stop there, and I'll pick it up tomorrow with this line. In the meantime, new holidays, identity group flags, etc. So that's where we'll pick this up tomorrow. It's a very interesting editorial or op-ed that I think bears a lot of study. Okay, let's take a peek at the card for January 30. Boy, we only got one more day of January left. Jose.
Already?
Yeah. Do you know how many months have 28 days in them, Jose? Uh-huh.
Every single one of them.
Every one of them. Yeah, now, you know, the late John Anderson, may he rest in peace, as far as I know, is the only person, excepting myself, who knew how to pronounce the name of the second month. Did you know that there are 2 R's in February? It ain't February. It's February.
February.
Okay, so the card. We start out, of course, with systemic racism, and then we have to touch on Monica again today. I noticed they had another demonstration.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And they're demonstrating in the up in Saipan too, so it's contagious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Then we've got the Daily News writes about the Chamorro Land Trust Commission versus Amo Chamorro, and their article actually makes some sense, unlike the article from the Post that ran yesterday. Then we have legislators versus Pennsylvania registration, and we have this item on the card will be brought to us by Jose himself.
I know that guy.
Yeah, he's a good man, Jose. I like to see him around here every day.
Okay.
Then we've got Doug versus the governor. I'll tell you this is an important item on the card. You can bank on it. And then we've got Melvin Wampet versus self-determination. And it occurred to me, I followed your clue, and I watched the hearing yesterday. And if you are in favor of Chamorro self-determination, Melvin Wampet is your biggest enemy. He has done more to retard self-determination. There have been a lot of people doing it, but I think he is I hate to use the word champion because he'll just throw the evidence away if I do.
True.
And the folks down in Jerry Kitchen are hoping that I don't refer to him as a champion either. The last thing they need is Melvin Wampet out in their kitchen in his Jeep. Okay, then we've got Democrats versus Republicans back in 1960, the way it used to be. And then we've got the American thinker versus the new religion called climate change. And then we've got Senator Blas versus Sandy. And this picks up on 185 and 184. Who out there could figure out why I'm referring to Senator Blas as Sandy? This is a little bit obscure even for me, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I'll give you a hint.
Okay.
The United States Supreme Court. See if you can figure that one out.
I can kind of guess it's a justice.
Yeah, you're right. Right so far, Jose. Okay, let's take a look at systemic racism. Just like the rule on tall tales is your shirt can be whatever color you want it to be. So if you get up in the morning and you get dressed and you put on a pair of blue trousers or a pair of blue slacks, and then when you get to work you find out, oh shucks, I put on a green shirt or a green blouse. We all know that green and blue don't go together, right? Green and white, green and black, green and tan, green and blue, no. Yeah. So if you find that out and anybody calls you on it, you say, no, this shirt ain't green, it's red. And red goes fine with blue. Yeah, that's the trick.
There's no argument.
No. And if anybody wants to make an issue of it, you cancel them. You say, okay, if that's the way you feel about the color of my shirt, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. And the person will stick his fingers in his ear, and that's it. End of conversation. That's the way they do it over at the Daily News. When Paul Zerzan wrote a letter to them saying, this rice ain't ain't red, it's orange. Scathing note in the lifestyle section, more scathing post from Cecile Chargaloff, fully larded with xenophobia and ethnocentrism. So they took Paul Zerzan to the woodshed because he dared bring the facts to their attention when they were so stuck on the narrative, and then they canceled him. They're not going to run his letters to the editor anymore. An analogy that I use repeatedly in the show because it comes up all the time. We have the facts and the truth, and then we have this narrative that if you're born with male plumbing and you really want to be a female, you can. And you can play rugby with the girls if you so desire. I refer to it as systemic racism. It's a term of art on the show. If you didn't know before, now you will understand the term of systemic racism. Now, this is not systemic racism. Jeff's Pirates Cove is a great place. Out on Route 4 in Telefofo, beautiful beach, nice building, open air, pleasant surroundings, great food, good help, friendly people, museum, bookstore, you name it, it's all out there at Jeff's. And if you haven't been there before, man, you are really missing out. Jump in your car tomorrow, and don't do it now because you got to. Well, you could listen to Telltales all the way to Jeff's because he doesn't close until 6. So Jeff's Pirates Cove, and I'm always looking for reports. You know, the most dangerous man on the island, went out there with his son and his son's fiance, confessing that he'd never been there before, and he confessed error. He said it's everything I've said it was. Yeah. So make a pilgrimage to Jeff's, and tell us about it when you can. Okay, next we go to the Maneka show, and Maneka. Maneka picks up on the atrocity that occurred when Hamas warriors escaped the Gaza Strip and engaged in a massacre in Israel. And she is siding with the massacreurs, not the massacrees. She's really solidly identified with the Palestinians and is absolutely anti-Israel, uses all the inflammatory language. Now, here's the tall tales on what's going on in that, the tall tales ruling on what's going on in that piece of dirt called Israel. There are Palestinians, there are Jews living in Israel. And both of them have historical claims to that piece of dirt. Historical claims are interesting, but I'm not aware of any single instance where historical claims are conclusive, where a group of people can come along and say, we were here 2,000 years ago, but we left, but now we're back, so you guys got to get out of here. I don't think that has ever happened. The history of the world is actually the opposite. The history of the world is migration, conquest. Indigeneity has never been seen as a strength. It's always been seen more along the lines of a weakness. I can remember as a youngster, seeing National Geographic, and they discovered this lost tribe in the jungles of Borneo or Malaya or someplace like that, who had never been in contact with Western civilization. So the theme of these articles was they're not familiar with Western civilization. We have to be gentle with them. We must be gentle because they're not up to speed on guns, for instance. But the history of the world, the history of economic progress, prosperity, whatever you have, is one of migration. when folks in the Fertile Crescent were able to domesticate grass and turn it into wheat. And when they figured out how 8 different species of mammals could be herded, and they herded these mammals, and they broke out of the Fertile Crescent and spread around the world, that's when, standards of living dramatically improved. Now, a country like the United Kingdom, all those guys they're all white supremacists over there. Well, England has been invaded, 5 times, something like that? The Vikings, the Norsemen, the French, on and on and on. And England probably has a small island like Great Britain did more to bring, and I know I'm going to get trouble for this, civilization to the rest of the world than any other people in the world. And they're not pure. They're not indigenous.
They actually led the fight to end slavery in the world.
They did indeed. They were the front runners on the elimination of slavery.
Not the U.S.
Yeah. So, this historical claims is not conclusive as to who has what rights in Israel. I know that the Israelis have done some things that I don't approve of. As an example, after Israel was created in 1948, it was immediately attacked by its 6 Arab neighbors who wanted to exterminate everybody in Israel. But the Israelis turned out to be really good. No more Masada for the Israelis. They turned out to be really good fighters, and they won that war. And they won every other time they were attacked. And they wound up occupying the west bank of the Jordan River, which had, in the initial partition, been a part of Jordan. In fact, once upon a time, it was called Transjordan. I'll bet they're glad they don't call it Transjordan anymore. Or is this going to be the new battle cry for the trannies, Jose?
They can identify whatever they want to identify as.
Yeah, they'll start a mass migration to the other side of the river and say, give us back our land. We're Transjordanites. So the Israelis said, this is occupied territory. The Jordanians didn't want it, by the way. They knew enough about the Palestinians, they didn't want it. So the Israelis said, we're occupying it until we can come up with a 2-state solution. But then they encouraged Israeli settlers to settle in land that they don't even claim sovereignty over. There have been a lot of reports about how Israelis treated Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Frenchie has laid out much of this stuff in great detail. And, one thing you got to say about Frenchie, he never offends silence, Jose. When Frenchie talks, it's always a good idea to listen, and he's always, replete with an armor of facts. So I don't say that the Israelis are as bad figure of speech, as white as the driven snow. Although the Palestinians will tell you that. They'll tell you these people aren't even Semitic. They're Europeans who claim they're Jews now so they can come back and take our country away from us. So I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs between the two. I'm going to condemn savagery, no matter who does it, standing on my principle that it's never okay to take the life of a helpless, innocent human. It's never all right. Whether that helpless human is Palestinian, Israeli, male, female, whatever. And that's exactly what happened at that massacre. So I start out, not being real crazy about Hamas, but they have grievances. So I'm not going to get into that. But the people that really gripe me are our local folks who would hijack that issue and then recast it to their own benefit and come up with this crap that Moneca has been peddling, and it goes like this. They demonstrated in front of the legislature when a resolution pended to sympathize and emphasize with Israel and give them support. And Moneca and a half dozen of her protege folks came out there and demonstrated, and the Post interviewed them. And this is what the Post reported, according to the article I've got in front of me. The problem with the resolution, according to Flores, is that it is, quote, very one-sided. It totally erases the murder of close to 10,000 people. It erases what we're looking at, several decades of violent colonization. See what I mean, Jose? She can't open her mouth without the C word coming out, happening in occupied Palestine. And so now we need our leaders to actually take a position for the Palestinians. Flores likened the atrocities in Palestine to what the Chamorro people have gone through. Hijacks the issue, recasts it, and says the same thing happened to us.
Wrong.
The thing is, we are a colonized people in the Marianas and in the Pacific, and we know very well what it's like to be imprisoned, to be forcefully removed from our lands, to be forced to march, to lose our language, to lose our land to eminent domain for so-called national security, for us to watch it happening, for the whole world to watch it happening in Palestine right now and watch the United States government and other Western governments basically supporting that horrible ethnic cleansing. Yeah, the ethnic cleansing on Guam was really something. You know how they did it here, Jose? They wanted to get rid of all of the Chamorros on Guam. So they made it real easy for them to migrate to the continental 48. And it worked so well that there are now Chamorros living there than there are here.
A lot more.
Talk about ethnic cleansing, huh? Yeah. And then she goes on to say, we are here to demand more of our leaders. Our leaders cannot take that position, and they need to rise up for the Palestinian people. Yeah, good going, Moneca. So I was going to go to CLT versus Ahmad Chamorro, but it just occurred to me that I ought to stay with self-determination here for a moment. But let's take a break first, Jose.
Yikes! Are those expensive credit card bills arriving? Well, we can help. Bank Pacific has launched our New Year's Resolution Solution personal loan with annual percentage rates as low as 7.49% when you pay off your credit cards or for whatever you want, starting at 7.49% APR. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com and come join us. We're still celebrating. Equal credit opportunity lender. Conditions apply. Happy New Year.
The following is a public notice lane closure announcement for the Ukudu pipeline replacement on Route 16 between Reventax and Marine Corps Drive, Route 1. The lane closure will take place starting in January till the end of June 2024 as a 24-hour continuous operation. The project, a 198-megawatt combined cycle power plant. Again, the closure will take place starting in January till the end of June 2024. For more information, please contact 671-649-0001. Thank you for your patience as we move forward for Guam.
And now back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
Okay, we're back here with Melvin Wampet versus decolonization. And I made the bold statement that if you are in favor of decolonization, you want to concentrate on Melvin Wampet, because I can't think of anyone who has done more to retard decolonization than Melvin Wampet. First of all, he and his commission, with one exception, is basically his under his spell, so to speak, are gaslighting the people. And they say, you know, there are only three options under the United Nations: independence, statehood, free association. Well, I've explained on more than one occasion why free association is not an option. If you want a free association with the United States, you got to be independent and then negotiate, which is independence. Second thing, the United States State Department said that there are only three possibilities for Guam: independence, statehood, and where we are right now, a territory. Actually, there are two different kinds, incorporated and unincorporated. So there is no, quote, there is no free association. And if you read the UN documents, they would add a fourth status, and that is anything adopted by the people who have the ability to freely consent to a status that's satisfactory to the people. So if enough people on the island here voted for it in a free and fair plebiscite, they voted to stay the way we are, that would be decolonization. Now, no, that's not decolonization, because the you know, they've got rhetoric that would oppose it. But they can't base their rhetoric on what the United Nations says. So if they're going to bend the truth on that, ask yourself when they have lunch meetings what they eat for lunch. You know what they eat for lunch, Jose?
What is it?
Systemic racism. Yeah. They set that plate of orange rice on the table. Hey, pass the red rice, you guys. So there's that. Then he runs this do-nothing commission that costs us about $1 million a year. He knocks down close to $100,000 a year himself. And what have they accomplished? They've put out a lot of propaganda, self-serving propaganda. Roy called sort of an observational hearing. It's hard to know exactly what it was. I didn't see any notice for it.
I didn't either.
Yeah, but so the legislature met, and Wampet was there, Eloy Hera was there, and the legendary Michael Bavacqua was there. And in addition to Roy, Tello was there, and that was it. So apparently senators either didn't get the word and didn't show up, or they did get the word and didn't show up. So I don't think there's much popular feeling in the legislature for what's going on there. So here are some excerpts from the workup that Joe Titano did for the Daily News. One of three task forces charged with educating the island about Guam's political status option is without a chairperson, according to Commission on Decolonization Executive Director Melvin Wampet. There's no leadership for the Free Association Task Force, Wampet told lawmakers Monday, and the task force has not expended any money in about 2 years. Now, I maintain that this whole lash up, the whole commission is just the Commission for Chamorro Independence. But they know that that's too big a word to swallow, so they're camouflaging it under this self-determination thing and selling it this way. You know, first with the Spanish, then with the Americans, then with the Japanese, then with the Navy, and now with the Organic Act. Nobody ever asked us what we wanted. We want to make a choice. Well, what choice do you want? Well, we want to make a choice. It's like me taking you down to McDonald's. I'll say, what do you want? Well, I want to make a choice. Do you want a Big Mac? Oh, I don't know. But I do know I want to make a choice. Yeah, so they do that because Bavacqua and Wampet and some of the Monday Hollywood wannabe, Hope Cristobal, obviously want independence. But they know that the people will choke on that, so they got to work their way into it gradually. So the third leg on their three-legged stool, there's no member for it, and there hasn't been any money spent for it. Decolonization Oversight Chairman Roy Kanata held an informational briefing Monday to get updates on the task forces for free association, statehood, and independence. The island remains a non-self-governing territory of the U.S., which, according to the United Nations, means its people do not have a full say in their government. Well, poorly worded sentence.
What? Exactly.
We do have a full say in our government. Yeah. What they're trying to say is we don't have representative in the National Congress. But we've got complete home. We've got more. We've got actually would have more than what we got, but we've waved it off. So we do have complete home rule. We don't have a voting member in the House or the Senate, not because the folks in Washington don't want us to, but because of the way the Constitution is constructed. And the Constitution is extremely difficult to amend. And it's not going to be amended to accommodate an island with 154,000 people on it. Since 2000, Guam has authorized a non-binding plebiscite. Non-binding on whom? A non-binding plebiscite that would allow inhabitants to vote what political relationship they desire with the U.S. I wouldn't get to vote in that, Jose. I'm a third-class citizen, remember? But a federal court in 2017 found the law was illegally race-based. The Decolonization Commission is responsible for organizing such a plebiscite, but since that ruling left the vote at a standstill, the only thing they can do is educate the public, Juan Pat said.
Why do they keep saying it's at a standstill?
Because they don't want it to move.
So it's an artificial standstill then. They're the ones holding it up. Nobody else is holding it up.
Exactly. I mentioned this. They could do the same thing the Democrats did. They could conduct their own plebiscite. And if they did it right, it would have great credibility. But this is my intuition, Jose. They don't want to do that because they know they're going to lose. And if they did hold that plebiscite, you know what the winning vote would be? Statehood. Not because people really want to be a state, or even because they think it's possible, but given the other two choices, it's the default choice. So the gridlock would mean we stay right where we're at. And of course, this would be the subject of a lot of stump speeches. You want to keep the status quo? Vote for statehood. You want to put Bavacqua, Hope Cristobal, and Melvin Wampet in charge? Vote independence. And that's what you'll get. Let's see. Let me get back to this here. The article goes on to say that a new plebiscite is in the works, the PDN reported last March, but no legislation has yet been introduced. Under the free association option, Guam would be an independent nation with close ties to the U.S. or some other nation.
Well, that's a really telling paragraph, right?
Yeah,
a sentence.
Yeah, and I've hypothesized, we could be a province of the Philippines. If the national government went along with it and we liked it, we could petition to be the fifth state in the Federated States of Micronesia.
Now is that sentence written by Joe Titano?
Yes.
His understanding?
Uh-huh. Yep.
It's a perfect example of why free association is not an option.
Not an option. No one has yet stepped forward to fill the seat at the Free Association Task Force, and because each task force is basically an informal volunteer group, there's no movement in that area, the director said. Certainly he hasn't made a move.
Nope.
No way.
And I don't know if you're going to get to this, but you mentioned that there's appropriations for this, and this was kind of an informal, or it was a formal questionnaire about it. Senator Joseph Augustine passed the bill into a law that allows these appropriations to move from the task force over to the main commission.
Of course.
And that's very suspect.
So there's no incentive for Juan Pet to go out and fill that position.
None.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, they get awarded for not filling the position, not spending any money.
Exactly, and they get the money. There's also leadership issues at the Statehood Task Force, which advocates that Guam seek status as a U.S. state. Statehood Vice Chair Eloy Hara on Monday told senators, "This would probably be my last participation, as much of this time was now spent caring for his elderly wife." Hara said he'd been advocating statehood as an appointee for about 30 years. No sense rushing into these things. He was filling in Monday for Statehood Task Force Chair Eddie Duenas, who Hara said was sick. Hara did comment that he felt much of the youth education that was going on at the commission was a waste of time. This is a guy who knows what's going on.
I concur.
And that money would be better spent educating members of the public that were of the age to vote, because there's nothing to vote on.
But if there's any big indication that there's a huge delay and there is an effort to indoctrinate, it's this move to just educate elementary school kids.
Yeah, and high school kids.
And high school kids.
Yeah. Wampet noted the commission has been piloting a decolonization curriculum for local high schools and has taken to hosting an annual Fanjita youth conference to educate kids about decolonization. I think you got the right word, indoctrinate. If you're not going to tell the whole truth, it ain't education. More active was the Independence Task Force.
You don't say.
Yeah, which co-chair Michael Bavakwa said had recently restarted hosting regular community meetings and had launched on an independence music video series to stir up engagement on the decolonization front. Here's how much money each task force spent of its $55,000 budget in fiscal 2023. Statehood, $14,975. Independence, $31,561. Free association, $0.
These are not task force for education. These are advocacy groups.
Exactly.
And this is ridiculous that we're giving money to advocacy groups when it's supposed to be about education. And I'm looking at what Mr. Harris said. You know, he was contending that the reason they exist is not to do a continuous years-long educational drive, but to educate the voter when the governor announces that there's going to be a vote, or whatever entity announces that there's going to be a vote on decolonization. Until then, what's the point? And the point is indoctrination.
No election, no education. It just makes sense. And as I've pointed out, if you really want to do that, then do it. You just can't involve state actors. And Rice versus Cayetano, the U.S. Supreme Court case that caused the Chamorro registry to morph into the original inhabitants registry, cited to a private advocacy group as passing constitutional muster. But you just can't have state actors involved so long as we have a 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which applies here, and a Voting Rights Act. Okay, let's go on to, let's stick with the whole Chamorro shtick here. We'll take a break and we'll come back to the CLTC versus Amot Chamorro.
Hafa-day, Alex Dimapon here from Security Title. Title reports, escrow forms, signatures, statements, and title insurance. When it comes to buying, selling, or refinancing your property, we do it all for you. At Security Title, we enjoy watching your dreams come true and being the ones to make sure it happens just as you planned. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
Yikes! Are those expensive credit card bills arriving? Well, we can help. Bank Pacific has launched our New Year's Resolution Solution personal loan with annual percentage rates as low as 7.49%. Money to pay off your credit cards or for whatever you want, starting at 7.49% APR. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com and come join us. We're still celebrating. Equal credit opportunity lender. Conditions apply. Happy New Year.
Okay, I'm going to start CLTC versus Amot Chamorro. CLTC, by the way, now the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, if you want to be a commissioner, you got to be Chamorro, no matter what. Now, yesterday, I read into the record the story that KOA, the Julian Hernandez story that done by Julian Hernandez. It was a mishmash of birth certificates and grandfathers and a lot of emotion about the wonders of Amot Chamorro. But if you didn't understand the Chamorro Land Trust Commission, you certainly wouldn't understand it by reading that article. The Daily News, Joe Titano did a much better job, and it goes like this. Suruhana faces removal from Amot Farm on land trust property that her family's lived on for nearly 50 years. Now, when I saw the 50 years, I thought, man, they only started letting leases in 97. That isn't 50 years ago. But he explains it. Here's how it goes. A 75-year-old woman's eligibility to stay on a parcel of Chamorro Land Trust property is being called into question after she and her family have lived on it and farmed it for nearly 50 years. Since 1975, the family of Bernice Tudela Nelson, a Suruhano, has occupied the parcel of land trust property where her Amot Tautau farm in Dedido was built. Now, this is how the sentence reads. Has occupied the parcel of land trust property where her Amot Tautau farm in Dedido was built on. Do we need the word on there, Jose? The farm grows medicinal plants and herbs. Last year, Land Trust identified a problem that may find Nelson ineligible to occupy the land. The issue stems from a lack of documents proving her grandfather was living on Guam under the administration of the old U.S. naval government. Born and raised on Saipan, Nelson moved to Guam in the 1970s, where she became a citizen through marriage, she told PDN. She had roots on Guam, however, because her grandfather, Kin Sablan Tudela, was born on the island before moving north to Saipan as a young man. Nelson said she acquired a lease for the property of her father, where her farm now sits, in 1975, and let her father work the land for years while she followed her husband on his military deployments off-island. Land trust documents identify her as a preoccupier, one of a number of people who, for one reason or another, were living on or farming land trust property before the CLTC began surveying and issuing leases in the 1990s. So her father really didn't, Her grandfather really didn't have a lease. He's what you would call, in common language, a squatter.
I was just about to ask you.
Yeah.
Is that a euphemism, preoccupier?
He was a squatter. So this was government of Guam land, and has been the government of Guam custom ever since. Government of Guam was properly operating its usual tongue farm on their land. So this guy named Tudela comes along, clears the lands, and starts farming it. I say good for him. Yeah. But that's not a lease. And it doesn't give rise to any property rights. Now, there is something called adverse possession. And that is if we're talking about land in the hands of a private owner, not the government, which is unregistered, and a person who is not the owner, who does not do this under color of title, moves onto the land and openly and hostilely claims ownership of it, the statute of limitations on an ejectment action would run in 5 years. So after 5 years, it'd be hard for the owner to get him off. Now, the squatter is not going to have marketable title. He's probably not going to be able to get title insurance. He's probably not going to be able to mortgage it, but that's it. But that doesn't run against government land, which I suspect this was. Nelson said she acquired a lease for the property where the farm sits in 1975. Well, her father could sign a paper called lease, or he could quitclaim it to her. But, of course, his lease can't create an estate any larger than the one he owns. So if he didn't own anything, the lease is an interesting piece of paper, but that's all it is. So she acquired a lease and let her father work the land for years. Land trust documents identify her as a preoccupier, one of a number of people who, for one reason or other, were living or farming land trust property before CLTC began surveying and issuing leases in the 90s. The Chamorro Land Trust Act was signed into law in 1975, and at that time made property available to native Chamorros who wanted to work or farm it at a price of just $1 a year. Because of administrative delays, the first CLTC lease was not signed until 1997. The administrative delays were no governor after that ever appointed the commission. No commissioners were appointed. In 1997, Angel Santos picked up the cudgel, and I won't go into the whole thing, but Mike Phillips brought suit against Governor Atta, forcing Governor Atta to appoint the members of the commission. It finally took off. Nelson, like others, applied for a lease to the property her family already occupied, records show. When her father eventually decided to go back to Saipan, Nelson came back to Guam and took over the property. She opened the farm in 2010, has been growing herbs and plants for omelet and teaching the practice to others. People take for granted that, oh, it's grass, but it's got medicinal use. So I go every Chamorro month. I go to school, and they show pictures and plants, as Suruhana said. They really listen. You know, whenever I see the word Suruhana or Suruhana, I wonder if Ko does this too, or if he's too busy taking unescorted females to the cave. I guess I ought to ask, do a Sunshine and Rory and see what I can find out.
It's a personnel matter.
Yeah. She said she enjoyed the work, but Typhoon Mawar struck and damaged much of the farm last month. She hasn't been through a lot of storms. She has been through a lot of storms. Her mother wanted a little money to fix her house up, but trouble started when she tried to get the CLTC to guarantee her loan, because homesteaders on land trust property, they're not homesteaders, they're lessees. Big difference. Don't own the property. Lenders can't hold the land up as collateral. Hello? Instead, homesteaders have to ask CLTC to back their loan amount. When the Surahana applied for a loan guarantee, land trust agents were unable to find any documentation supporting her eligibility for the property. We'll come back to this after the halftime show.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Weighing his options. Fox News, I'm Sue Guzman, awaiting a U.S. response now to an Iran-backed drone attack that left American soldiers dead and injured after President Biden vowed he will take action.
American forces in the Middle East had been attacked at least 165 times by these Iranian-backed militias. That's just since October 7th. And now that Americans have been killed, the pressure is really ramping up on President Biden to hit back hard and potentially even on Iranian soil. 3 American soldiers died on Sunday after a remote outpost in Jordan called Tower 22 was targeted by a suicide drone launched by Iranian-backed militants. Dozens of other Americans were injured in the attack, which happened while American service members were sleeping. The 3 fallen soldiers have now been ID'd as Army Reserve soldiers out of Fort Moore, Georgia. Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Brianna Moffitt.
Fox's Bill Malusian. UN employees under fire amid allegations they were involved with the terrorist group that helped plan the October 7th attacks in Israel.
The Biden administration says it'll be looking very hard at that UN agency's next steps to ensure it is thoroughly investigated. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the accusations against the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, deeply troubling and says there needs to be accountability. The Israeli government accuses more than a dozen UNRWA employees of participating in the October 7th terrorist attack. It details one aid worker kidnapping an Israeli woman, another raiding an Israeli kibbutz, one more handing ammunition to Hamas terrorists. That's led to more than a dozen countries, including the United States, to halt funding to the organization pending an investigation.
Fox's Rich Etson and an ex-IRS contractor responsible for leaking Donald Trump's tax returns was sentenced to 5 years in prison Monday. Charles Littlejohn also hit with a $5,000 fine. America's listening to Fox News.
Yikes! Are those expensive credit card bills arriving? Well, we can help. Bank Pacific has launched our New Year's Resolution Solution personal loan with annual percentage rates as low as 7.49%. Money to pay off your credit cards or for whatever you want, starting at 7.49% APR. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com and come join us. We're still celebrating. Equal credit opportunity lender. Conditions apply. Happy New Year.
Hafa, this is Josh here at APO. Our expertise and extensive network can help you grow your business and reach out to more global markets. As a responsible carrier, APO is also committed to a sustainable future, whether it's protecting the environment or investing our efforts in giving back to the community. Our dedicated teams in Guam, Saipan, and on U.S. mainland are here to support you. Call 588-4651 or visit www.apo.com.
House Speaker Mike Johnson says he intends to hold a House-wide vote on whether to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas as soon as possible. Fox's Peter Ducey.
The move to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas isn't because the border is a mess. It's because he said the border is not a mess right now. And these lawmakers feel like they have been lied to by him. So in the articles of impeachment, you've got Article 1, willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. And then Article 2 is a breach of public trust. The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, is saying this vote to impeach him is going to happen as soon as possible. And Speaker Johnson is one of the most outspoken voices against the bipartisan Senate negotiations on the border.
Homeland Security Department officials call the inquiry evidence-free and unconstitutional. The outgoing head of the National Rifle Association continues his testimony at his civil fraud trial.
NRA CEO Wayne LaPierre acknowledged Monday to wrongly expensing private flights for his family and accepting vacations from vendors doing business with a nonprofit without disclosing them. A Manhattan jury will decide if the outgoing NRA chief executive violated rules governing charities and nonprofits. The New York Attorney General sued the 74-year-old CEO and 3 co-defendants in 2020, claiming widespread misspending and self-enrichment. LaPierre's last day is Wednesday after decades in charge of the influential gun rights group. Tom Rigotti, Fox News.
Attorney General Merrick Garland will undergo back surgery this weekend. The Justice Department says he'll delegate his duties to the Deputy Attorney General. The 71-year-old Garland slated to return to work the week of February 5th. This news comes as Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin returned to work at the Pentagon after being hospitalized for a prostate cancer procedure that was kept secret for days. I'm Sue Guzman. This is Fox News.
The following is a public notice lane closure announcement for the Ukudu pipeline replacement on Route 16 between Reventax and Marine Corps Drive, Route 1. The lane closure will take place starting in January till the end of June 2024 as a 24-hour continuous operation. The project, a 198-megawatt combined cycle power plant. Again, the closure will take place starting in January till the end of June 2024. For more information, please contact 671-649-0001. Thank you for your patience as we move forward for Guam.
Listen to The Point anytime, anywhere on Odyssey. Odyssey is your new audio home for all the music, news, sports, and podcasts that matter to you. Find your favorite stations like The Point and discover more. Music stations, local and trusted news sources, sports talk and team coverage, plus today's biggest podcasts. Find it all on the Odyssey app. AUDACY.
Hafa-day, Alex Dimapon here from Security Title. Title reports, escrow forms, signatures, statements, and title insurance. When it comes to buying, selling, or refinancing your property, we do it all for you. At Security Title, we enjoy watching your dreams come true and being the ones to make sure it happens just as you planned. Call the professionals at Security Title. We are here to help.
there. Let's see that picture of me and Jeff again, Jose. Yeah, that's Jeff. That's me in the tailgater shirt, Jeff in the long white beard, the pirate. And he has a wine bottle in his hand that I found when I was in the States. And the picture on the wine bottle bears a striking resemblance to Jeff. I don't know how much you can blow it up, Jose. That's probably it, huh?
Yeah, that was the closest we got.
Yeah. But you can go out to Jeff's Pirates Cove and you can take a peek at that wine bottle and you'll say, man, that guy sure looks like Jeff. I recommend it. It's a great place to go for a ride, a snack, a drink, some fun, some sun, you name it. If you've never been there, do yourself a favor. Head for Jeff's Pirates Cove. Jeff sponsors systemic racism. Okay, let's go back to Bernice Nelson here. Bernice Tudela Nelson. And the property where she runs her Amot Tautotanu, her Chamorro medicine farm, which she may lose because she may not have been eligible for a lease from the get-go. Because people who have Chamorro land trust leases are unable to mortgage their property, they don't own it. The Chamorro Land Trust Commission can guarantee loans, but when they do that, they do a little title research, and they found out that maybe Nelson is not entitled to that property after all. Now, this article lays it out pretty clearly, unlike the KUAM article, which just sowed a lot of confusion. During the CLTC meeting this month, Commission staff reported that immigration documents showed Joaquin Joaquin Sablan Tudela, Bernice Nelson's grandfather, had immigrated to Guam in 1951, a year after the Organic Act was signed. Tudela would not have been a resident of the island when the Organic Act made residents of U.S. citizens on August 1, which under the old land trust rules that Bernice got her lease under was what qualified a resident as a, quote, native Chamorro eligible for land lease. Tudela, as it turns out, was born on Guam. Nelson presented a copy of her grandfather's birth certificate, which showed Tudela was born in Hagati on December 16, 1895. He was baptized 5 days later at the cathedral. Tudela moved to Saipan at some point as a young man and put down roots, according to his granddaughter. She says she wasn't sure about the details. Quote, from what I understand, they get so many young men and go to Saipan, put them in Tinia and Rhoda from Guam. We never talked about it. My dad, he just said that my dad used to translate for English to Japanese, Japanese to Chamorro. The Empire of Japan captured Saipan from Germany in 1914 in the middle of World War I. I guess they changed the dates of World War I. It used to be that it started in 1914. If a record of Tudela living on Guam after 1898 can be found, Nelson may be able to qualify under the new land trust rules, which were formed after the federal government sued land trusts for awarding leases on the basis of race. Under the new rules, any person can get a lease if their land was acquired by the federal government between 1898 and 1968, or if they occupied, used, or farmed land that was acquired by the federal government during that same period, which is what I've been telling you, but which the Land Trust Commission has kept on the down low, Jose. Being on that 1995 list gets you nowhere. Some records would have to be found, but Nelson said she's the only person working the omelet farm and doesn't have time to go searching for it herself. Land trust staff have been helpful in searching for records, she told the Daily News. and recently found a record of her coming to Guam from Saipan in 1948. But it remains to be seen whether commissioners will be able to allow her to stay on the property. CLTC is to meet soon to discuss a number of issues. CLTC Chairman Earl Garrido told the Surojano earlier this month that it was not their intention to boot her out. As long as this is still in litigation, then you will not be evicted from the premises because research is being done on your behalf. Bernice Nelson said, if God permits, she wants to stay on anyhow. So I'm going to make a bet, Jose. I'm going to make a bet that Ms. Nelson is not going to be able to come up with proofs that she or her aunts or her grandfather or her father, anybody else, ever farmed or cropped land or owned land that was taken by the federal government. Therefore, under the new rules, she is not eligible. But the Chamorro Land Trust Commission will figure out some hokey way to let her stay, because that's the emotional thing to do, right?
And this is not this is a well-known area here. A lot of people have known about this place for a long time, visited. The OG knows about it. I'm sure this place has received grants and other services from extension services. How did she receive those without any proper credentials?
Yeah.
And this is another indication of what's messed up here on Guam.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because of lost paperwork or anything like that. There's that sota prim mentality that goes around.
Exactly.
And it just messes up the whole island for everybody.
Now, the documentation that she would have shown would be the lease.
Just the lease alone.
Yeah, she was a lessee, but when the property was let, there was no due diligence involved.
Right. Okay, I see.
Yeah. And I think you're exactly right. And my suspicion is this: when the Chamorro Land Trust finally determines she's not eligible under the rules, what are we going to do? Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we just sota prim. Just let it go.
That's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's too bad that that's how it's going to happen. We can't follow any rules. And the emotional argument is going to be, she's been there forever.
Yeah. And she's doing good. It'll be the drag strip, the Automobile Racing Federation argument. Well, it's good for the community. And besides that, it makes my tummy warm. And besides that, if we moved her off there, my anal sphincter would get so tight that I'd have to double up on my dose of Metamucil.
Yikes.
Yeah, so much for the Chamorro. Once again, never underestimate the ability of the Chamorro Land Trust Commission to screw things up, because they will always be able to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Okay, let's see what's next on the card here. I'm going to go back to the order on the card. Yeah, you're up next. Jose, that's you over there in the on-deck circle swinging 3 bats just to get ready into the batter's box.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a good transition into this, and I guess it just has to do with government functions and branches of government, right?
All right.
Now, when I brought this to you, I mentioned that this is about voter registration and how it extends to who determines those kind of voting laws, registration, and everything that has to do with voting. We experienced a little bit of the debacle during the COVID shutdown, when a lot of executive branches, governors, were determining how the policies of voting and the laws were going to change during the shutdown. And so in Pennsylvania, there's been a number of legislators who are challenging an executive order from President Biden, a voter registration executive order. And I'm going to read through this. I was going through some back history on this article, and this is not the only state that has a question with this this executive order by Biden. There was an article that came out probably about in April of 2023. There's at least 15 other secretaries of states, and of course they had to label them as Republican, who are questioning this executive order. But we can get into that another day. So this one is 24 GOP legislators in Pennsylvania challenge Biden over voter registration executive order. Again, I ask that you keep two things in mind. There's a discussion on automatic on the merits of automatic voter registration, and then there's also the argument or discussion on the separation of powers and checks and balances and which branch of government determines. So a group of 24 Republican legislators in Pennsylvania have filed a federal complaint against President Joe Biden, Governor Josh Shapiro, and representatives of the Pennsylvania Department of State, saying that they have usurped the authority of the legislature by changing voter registration and election rules. The legislators say that the Elections Clause and the Electors Clause of the U.S. Constitution give state legislators the sole constitutional right to determine the manner of elections, and there is no role for the president, governor, or other executive officials, such as the Secretary of State, to create, rewrite, or disregard the laws established by the legislature. The group alleges they have been unconstitutionally excluded from the lawmaking process regulating federal elections for president and Congress. And this article states that the list of 25 plaintiffs or legislators here. I'm not going to go through that. Their complaint in U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania asked a judge to declare three actions unconstitutional: a voter registration executive order made by President Biden, a voter registration action by Governor Shapiro, and some Department of State directives. They also request that the judge issue an order prohibiting the president, governor, or state executives from making future changes to the election process in Pennsylvania without following the legislative process. The legislature alone must provide election regulations, including those relating to the registration of voters, the court papers say. In 2021, President Biden signed Executive Order 14019 for prompting access to voting, requiring all federal agencies to develop a plan to increase voter registration and participation. In response, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services announced in 2022 that federal health centers across the nation now have the discretion to participate in activities, including voter registration, that are outside the scope of the Health Center Program project. Such voter registration activities may include making available voter registration materials to patients, encouraging patients to register to vote, assisting patients with completing the registration forms, sending forms to election authorities, etc. And they allow also to allow private and nonpartisan organizations to conduct on-site voter registrations, according to the HHS website. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development instructed more than 3,000 public housing authorities managing some 1.2 million public housing units across the country to run voter registration drives in those units. And the U.S. Department of Education sent a letter to universities directing them to use federal work-study funds to support voter registration activities. The letter said if a student is employed directly by a post-secondary institution, the institution may compensate a student for employment involving voter registration activities that take place on or off campus. The U.S. Department of Agriculture issued letters to state agencies administrating the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Women, Infant, and Children Low-Income Food Program, instructing them to carry out voter registration activities with federal funds. The legislatures say voter registration drives are now not a government function. Keep in mind that almost all the states and the District of Columbia are included in this executive order. Guam was not, as well as Puerto Rico. But we do have our own laws here. Like, I think people can opt in to register to vote through their driver's license application.
You are, yeah, I think you are, unless you opt out.
Oh, okay. So it's automatic with an opt-out. Okay. Typically, private parties, including plaintiffs, campaigns, political parties, and organizations, conduct voter registration drives as acknowledged and regulated by federal campaign finance laws, the court papers say. Federal campaign finance laws apply to private parties' voter registration activities. Voter registration drives are a federally recognized private function and not a government function. President Biden's executive order also directed federal agencies to use taxpayer money to choose approved, nonpartisan third-party organizations and state officials to provide voter registration services on agency premises. The Pennsylvania state legislators have, through legislative acts, passed a law that prohibits the influence of third-party entities in elections. The executive order contradicts Pennsylvania state election laws, court paper says. And in September of 2023, Governor Shapiro announced in a press release that he was changing voter registration laws by enacting automatic voter registration. According to the press release, anyone eligible to vote is automatically registered to vote when they get their driver's license. Pennsylvania lawmakers have tried several times using the legislative process to implement automatic voter registration in Pennsylvania. Every attempt has failed. At the time Governor Shapiro announced this change, there was another bill pending in the legislature to enact automatic voter registration. Lawmakers in the court filings say Shapiro's action was not legally authorized by any state law. And they go and make a statement pertaining to that. A spokesperson for the Pennsylvania Department of State, the DOS, called the claim groundless and told the Epoch Times in an email that state law grants the secretaries of the Commonwealth and Transportation broad authority to determine the form of Pennsylvania's combined driver's license and voter registration form. The changes to the voter registration process through the Department of Transportation in September have resulted in a 44% increase in new voter registrations over the same time period 2 years ago, and are consistent with both the National Voter Registration Act and Pennsylvania law, the DOS states. That's the Department of State. Keep in mind, the National Voter Registration Act was what's also known as the Motor Vehicle Act, or Motor Voter Act back in the 90s. And then finally, the Pennsylvania Department of State has issued numerous directives that contradict laws established by the legislators, according to court papers, including a 2018 directive concerning Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, matching driver's licenses or social security numbers for voter registration applications. This guidance instructs Pennsylvania counties to register applicants even if an applicant provides invalid identification. State legislatures say they passed a law regarding verification of information on voter registration applications, but directives issued through the Department of State contradict state election laws. This created confusion in counties as local officials had two sets of directions, one from the legislature and one from the Department of State. The DOS told the Epoch Times the HAVA matching directive issued in 2018 is also fully consistent with applicable laws and remains active. If permitted to stand, similar directives can occur again in the future, according to court papers. And of course, the governor's office for Pennsylvania has not offered any comment as asked by Epoch Times. interesting goings on. Will any precedent be set if any ruling has happened here for the rest of this United States?
Let me pick up on that right after we get back from Jose.
Yikes! Are those expensive credit card bills arriving? Well, we can help. Bank Pacific has launched our New Year's Resolution Solution personal loan with annual percentage rates as low as 7.49%. Ready to pay off your credit cards or for whatever you want, starting at 7.49% APR. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com and come join us. We're still celebrating. Equal credit opportunity lender. Conditions apply. Happy New Year.
Hi, this is Jerry Roberts. What's happening in the workplace? What about your job and career? What ideas will find their way into your world? That's what you get with the Extra Point every day on The Ray Gibson Show here on 93.3 FM. Sometimes it's about what's in the news, or working relationships, or how to get further and do better. I try to make it interesting, inspiring, and hopefully sneak a little fun in too. Be a part of it. 7:25 weekday mornings. The Extra Point. Brought to you by First Hawaiian Bank.
Wrigley Field in Chicago, world's most beautiful ballpark. I got to pitch a couple more innings, and I can retire to the dugout for another day. Before we left for Wrigley, Jose asked if the decision coming out of the Pennsylvania U.S. Federal District Court might establish a precedent. And the answer is yes, with a little definition of the word precedent required. Now, when a plaintiff brings suit in a district court against an official of the national government for an injunction, and he's successful, that injunction applies nationwide. So if it's a suit against, say, the Secretary of State, and the plaintiff prevails, and joining the Secretary of State, it applies everywhere. Thus, when a district court in Hawaii, a federal district court in Hawaii, made a ruling on an immigration matter, the U.S. Attorney General at the time, what was his name? The guy from from Alabama. Trump's first Attorney General. Sessions. Yeah, Sessions said, commenting on this nationwide injunction phenomenon, which a lot of commentators say it's not the way to do it. It's highly criticized, but it is the way the system works. So Sessions said, here we have this national immigration problem, and some judge on a faraway island rules that, blah, blah, blah. And the folks in Hawaii really got up in arms about that. They did him a NECA. Not understanding that this didn't have anything to do with them, just the phenomenon of the nationwide injunction. Even a district judge in Hawaii can have an impact on a federal official in Massachusetts, is what he's saying. So in that respect, yeah, but of course, all the officials here, or many of the officials here, are state officials, but like Josh Shapiro, the governor, but President Biden is not a federal official, we know, but he is the president, so it'll apply to him. So that's part of what we mean when we say precedent. Now, here's another definition. Let's say that you're practicing law in New Mexico, and there's a particular point dealing with voting that you're arguing before a court in New Mexico, but there is no New Mexico case law on it. But there is Arizona case. Well, let's say there's Delaware case law on it. You cite the Delaware case, you point out the similarities and differences between the Delaware statute, and then the merits of the case. So it's a form of argument. It's not what we would call stare decisis, and it's not controlling precedent, but it can be very, very persuasive.
Yeah, I think I was referring to the former. So precedent is not the terminology then, or it's a form of precedent?
Form of precedent.
Form of precedent.
Now, there's an example, there's a case that started in the District Court of Guam called Bermudez versus Klitzkie. Started in the District Court here. And Bermudez was an inmate in the Department of Corrections. I was a director of corrections. Bermudez petitioned the court for a writ of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus, translate to English, means bring the body. So if a petition for a writ of habeas corpus is pending, the person who has custody of the prisoner brings him before the court and tells the court why it is that he has authority to hold that person prisoner. This is also referred to as post-conviction relief. There's a famous case dealing with a boxer named Hurricane Carter. It was made into a really good TV movie. Carter was sentenced to life in prison in New Jersey. And a bunch of Canadian lawyers picked it up and they said this was a wrongful conviction. All of the appeals had run, but they petitioned for habeas corpus saying that he was denied due process in the process of being convicted. The writ was granted and Hurricane blew away. He was sprung. So that's how habeas corpus works. So Bermudez filed, and it was very technical, dealing when the right to file the petition was precluded by the passage of time. And the District Court of Guam ruled against him. He went to the Ninth Circuit. Some case law came out of it. And I think now probably if you were to Google that case, you'd find out that it's been cited in a half dozen other cases that had nothing to do with me, him, or Guam, but by analogy, like what I do with systemic racism, lawyers use it as an argument. I think probably mostly prosecution lawyers are using it by analogy. So when you say precedent, the answer is kind of yes, Jose, kind of. So let's talk about this matter that's going on in Pennsylvania. Now, first of all, I want to break out my own petition for writ if I told you so. And back in the days right after the election, when all of the Democrats were walking around with puffed up chests saying, there have been 60 lawsuits and none of them ruled for Trump. And, it's a loss. Trump is just blowing smoke, et cetera. And my analysis was lawsuits are not very good devices for challenging elections right after the election or right before the election. Right before, and the case may not be ripe and it'll be subject to dismissal. Right after, and the judge may say, this matter's moot. You guys waited until the votes were counted, then you decided to bring your challenge. No, get out of here. That's one of the problems with suits challenging elections. Second problem is that they move so fast that there isn't enough time for pre-trial discovery to develop the kind of factual record that you really need to convince a judge that something bad happened. Now, after a few years have gone by and the dust is settled, a lot of this stuff is coming out of I see online, I've seen more than one of these things come up. Now, there's sort of a philosophical question here, and that is this. It's really clear that the Constitution of the United States said that the choice of electors, let me dig that clause out here. Article 2, section something or other. Yeah, Article 2, section 1, paragraph 2. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress, but no senator or representative or holding an office of title or trust on the United States shall be appointed an elector. So we know that in order to be elected president, you got to have 270 electors vote for you. And we know that the electors are chosen. I've explained this before. When you go to the polls, you're voting for electors. They short-circuited the process. You're voting for a name, but what you're really doing is voting for electors. So the electors are chosen in a manner determined by the state legislature. Now, here's how the Democrats want this to read. Each state shall appoint in a manner, in such manner as the legislature shall direct, unless there's a pandemic and other agencies of the state, like the governor, a commission, a secretary of state, the chief cook and bottle washer, the assistant dog catcher, shall determine because of the pandemic. And that's what happened. And I mentioned an article that I saw that said that in about 4 battleground states, only 50,000 votes would have made a different determination. And all of these states did not comply with that part of the Constitution. The governor came up with a rule, or the election commissioner, or poll watchers, or the cigar store merchant, or somebody did. So I pose this question. If the election of electors did not follow the rules required by the state legislature, is it even an election? Do you go beyond determining whether the right winner was declared, or just declare the whole election void, non-election? Let's say that here on the island, Melvin Bora and the Commission on Self-Determination determined that they would set the rules for elections. And the elections, would it be a real election? No, because of what the Constitution says here. So, you know, I think that it's kind of like Tony Atta. We haven't seen the last of this yet. But my fear is this, you know, being a conspiracy theorist by nature, you know, notice that we're starting to talk about Disease X now and the new pandemic, and GRMC and GMH now require masks again. Are we laying the foundation for a repeat? Because of the pandemic, we've got to play fast and loose with all of these rules, ballot harvesting, and all of these things that I think you can make a good faith argument that cost Trump the presidency because the Democrats cheated. And there's just so much to this story. The Time magazine article where all of these never-Trumpers got together and pooled their money and paid a lot of money to influence the legislature and election officials in the states.
It was a confession.
It was a confession, yeah. So we've got to be super vigilant when this stuff comes down. I don't take any comfort whatsoever that we have the ability to do the right thing. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if I were running the elections, if you want to vote, you get off your butt, you go down to the polls, you stand in line, you vote like everybody else. If you're not involved enough to do that, I don't want you to vote. I want people to have some idea why they're voting, who they're voting for, and why they're voting for that person. I don't want some layabout who can't even leave his television set long enough to go to the polls to vote. If they don't care, I don't want them. So I want everybody to go to the polls. As far as registration is concerned, same thing. You go to whatever the state official, the secretary, in Wisconsin, it'd be the county clerk or the city clerk. You go and you fill out the papers under penalty of perjury and you turn them in. I don't see, why are we making it easy for people to do something that's so important? Now the Democrats say, yeah, Bob wants voter suppression. And no, Bob does not want voter suppression. Bob wants to eliminate the possibilities of voter fraud.
There you go.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're opening the door to. This thing about driving up to the Westin Hotel with a car full of people. You know, we adopted the secret ballot at the turn of the century before the last one. Now you can drive up there with a car full of people and somebody will stick the ballot through the window. And, you know, some ancient guy like me says, I don't want to do this here in the car. Susie, can you fill this out for me? I don't like to do paperwork. Secret ballot, right? Yeah. It's just not a good way to do things. If people need help getting to the polls, fine, let's get them help getting to the polls. Let's let them call a cab and reimburse cab fare, but none of this handing it to them in the car or making them go to the Westin or something like that. What do you think, Jose?
I agree.
Good call.
It is. And you know what, this is also, like I said, another catalyst for a discussion on what you're talking about, the principle of voting. You know, there is no constitutional right. It's not written in there. But there are a whole lot of laws that have been written to make voting accessible. There's also the challenge in the states that's going on with redistricting. Also paper ballots being sent out to everybody.
Whether they don't even ask for it.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've seen the dangers of that, of the ballot stuffing that's happening in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Where they had to void an entire election because of that. So these are things that we really ought to have a discussion on and quell these people that just want to cry disenfranchisement as if that's a discussion to just yell out derogatory or terminology just to make
genocide.
To make it emotional. You're being a colonist, you know. And it just put that aside and let's talk about this and understand why there's concerns.
Now, it's really frightening to think that a president who's running for re-election has the ability to mobilize federal government officials to secure voter registration. Because this is what I imagine is happening. And we got this executive order that says we're supposed to go out and register voters, but keep this on the down low. Screen the people you register. You know who not to register and who to register if you want an ever-expanding federal government.
And that's why it's important to talk about who makes these decisions. It's the lawmakers, according to the Constitution, when it comes to voting, and that ought to be the same for voter registration.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's hope they're listening to Tall Tales back in D.C., Jose.
I'm sure they are.
Should we go to Churchill Downs?
Yes, sir.
You want to vote on it?
I can vote, but you'll always override.
All right.
Yikes! Are those expensive credit card bills arriving? Well, we can help. Bank Pacific has launched our New Year's Resolution Solution personal loan with annual percentage rates as low as 7.49%. Money to pay off your credit cards or for whatever you want, starting at 7.49% APR. Apply in person or online at bankpacific.com and come join us. We're still celebrating. Equal credit opportunity lender. Conditions apply. Happy New Year.
Half a day, this is Honey. Here at APL, our expertise and extensive network can help you grow your business and reach out to more global markets. As a responsible carrier, APL is also committed to a sustainable future, whether it's protecting the environment or investing our efforts in giving back to the community. Our dedicated teams in Guam, Saipan, and on U.S. mainland are here to support you. Call 588-4651 or visit apl.com.
Okay, here we are at Churchill Downs. 6 furlongs. I cross the finish line, and I wrap up another edition of Tall Tales. I'm going to deviate from the card again here. Still with something a little bit more lighthearted. I'm going to go to the difference between Democrats and Republicans in 1960. And this is by a guy named Gordon Skeen, who runs a website talking about the good old days. One of my favorite subjects, the good old days, you know. And it because of my advanced age, I am permitted to use introductory phrases like this. You know, when I was a boy, or, you know, back in the day, or in the 1950s in the golden age of America. And I do that all the time, Jose.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. So this is one by Skeen. The difference between Republicans and Democrats, Americans votes 1960. And, of course, I mentioned yesterday that was the only time I ever got to vote in an American election, 1960. And then I screwed up because I voted for John Kennedy, the Democrat. Should have voted for Nixon. And here's how it goes. Looking at the political year of 1960 from the eyes of 2024 is, to put it mildly, an almost mind-altering experience. That is, if you're not troubled with Alzheimer's because of your advanced age. 1960 to 2064, that's, let's see, that's 64 years, Jose. That's a long time. Suspend for a moment the glowing difference of sheer civility on the parts of the candidates of both parties. The idea that both parties had their conservative wings. Now, the conservative wings, let me talk about the Democrats. You know, a true blue Democrat, I'm going to mix some metaphors here, was called a yellow dog Democrat. A yellow dog Democrat would tell you this, you know, I'd vote for a yellow dog if and he were a Democrat.
Yeller.
Yeller, yeah.
Old yeller dog.
Yeah, but now the conservative Democrats were known as blue dog Democrats because they used to meet in the office of a senator whose name I forgot, who had a picture behind his desk that had a picture of a dog, the color of which was blue. That's where the term came from.
Interesting.
Yeah. The idea that both parties had their conservative wings, their moderate wings, and their liberal wings were probably not that far apart ideologically. As one of the members of the panel put it, the Democrat is a man who wants to expand the powers of the government. The Republican is a man who tends to want to limit the powers of government. Everything else was split down the middle. In 1960, many felt there wasn't that much difference between the two parties at all. One popular pundit at the time, Vance Packard, who authored the book The Status Seekers, also authored a book called The Hidden Persuaders. A really interesting book that told the reader about all the subliminal clues that media advertising came that were used to persuade you to buy their products. Things that you didn't notice, consciously notice, but had an impact on your brain housing group. The Hidden Persuaders. He was famous back in the day. He wrote a book called The Status Seekers, wrote there were 4 factors that would tell you 9 times out of 10 who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. 1, the money factor. 2, the ancestry factor. 3, the distance from the center of the city factor. 4, whether you were an egghead or not. The term egghead. Harvey, are you here? Yeah, I think Harvey might be an egghead. He's a pretty smart guy.
Head? I don't know. He's a nah.
No?
Egg, nah.
Nah. Egg, nah. Yeah.
And he's online right now.
Yeah, I mean, may chime. He probably can help us out with this. He really is a history buff, even more than me, and he knows a lot more than me, which is damning the poor guy with faint praise. But anyhow, the term egghead was used to describe a person who was intellectual, highly educated, and well-read. It was used to describe Adlai Stevenson during his 2 runs for president in 1952 and 1956. It was often said Stevenson lost because he was an egghead, and Americans tended to shun anyone who appeared smarter and more well-read than the average person. Compare that to 2024 for an eye-opener. Anybody that was... And there's something to that, and I refer to it as the common touch. Most voters want somebody that's smarter than they are, but they don't want it to be rubbed in. They want the common touch. They don't want to think that you go to the corner bar and while you're hoisting your can of Blatz, you're reciting Shakespeare. That's not what they're looking for. In many ways, the roles managed to reverse in 1964 when Goldwater forces attempted to hijack the GOP and take it on an abrupt right turn. And Goldwater's campaign slogan was, "A choice, not an echo." Telling you how much alike the two parties were alike. Yep. He also said, "Defense of liberty is a virtue, not a vice." Yeah, he finished dead last.
Eerily similar to things here.
And the formerly Solid South Democrats broke away to come into the Republican Party, leaving many of the liberal Republicans abandoned to switch parties, including Nelson Rockefeller, who was at one time a New Deal Democrat and became a rhino. My words, not theirs. Broke with the party, joined the GOP, becoming something of a pariah for a while, but staying despite his liberal leanings. How could anybody trust somebody named Rockefeller, Jose? This is a fascinating glimpse of politics from 1960. John F. Kennedy hadn't secured the nomination, nor had Richard Nixon, so it really was a guessing game as to who would carry the torch for their respective parties. In 1960, the time frame between nomination, campaigning, and election was considerably shorter than now, where the process drags on for almost 2 years. In 1960, choices were made, platforms were established, debates were held, crisscrossing the country, shaking hands and making promises, and the voters went to the polls. No name-calling, no threats of civil war, no endless tirades and scandals. Yes, it was different then. Yeah, it sure was. And the media complied with different rules. Nobody exploited John Kennedy's sexual picadillos, which nowadays would be more important than his political views. Okay, next item on the card is Governor, as you were, Doug versus the Governor. But it's just about time to say goodbye to our president, so I'm going to let that go until tomorrow. Tomorrow's Wednesday, right, Jose?
Yes, sir. You know, Harvey just brought up something about Rockefeller and his son. His son was a buffet feature in New Guinea in the early 60s. That was a crazy story, though.
A buffet feature.
His son was captured by, what do they call those? Cannibals.
Oh.
Yeah, and it was one of those stories where he went on a trading mission and then ended up being traded.
He was on the menu.
He was on the menu.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story if you've never heard of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sad story, too.
Yeah, I'm not going to eat it before dinner, Jose.
No, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so is it time, Jose? All right. Let's go, Brandon.
KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
The White House vows to respond. I'm Ted Lindner, Fox News. This after 3 U.S. soldiers were killed by a drone attack in Jordan over the weekend by an Iran-backed militia. Fox's Bill Malugin with the latest.
American forces in the Middle East had been attacked at least 165 times by these Iranian-backed militias. That's just since October 7th. And now that Americans have been killed, the pressure is really ramping up on President Biden to hit back hard and potentially even on Iranian soil. 3 American soldiers died on Sunday after a remote outpost in Jordan called Tower 22 was targeted by a suicide drone launched by Iranian-backed militants. Dozens of other Americans were injured in the attack, which happened while American service members were sleeping. The 3 fallen soldiers have now been ID'd as Army Reserve soldiers out of Fort Moore, Georgia. Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Breonna Moffett.
A South Carolina judge has denied Alec Murdaugh's request for a new trial. His defense team claiming there was jury tampering ahead of his 2023 conviction for the murder of his wife and son, but a judge disagreed on Monday. Attorney Eric Bland representing the jurors.
The law is clear, and you heard from 11 jurors in no uncertain terms that their verdict was their own conscience. It was not influenced by anything that may have been said or done by anybody other than the testimony, the law, and the evidence.
Murdaugh's defense team is pledging an appeal. Attorney General Merrick Garland will undergo back surgery this weekend. The Justice Department saying he'll delegate his duties to the Deputy Attorney General. The 71-year-old Garland is set to return to work the week of February 5th. Stocks closing higher on Wall Street at the start of a heavy week on Monday, a potentially market-moving news. The S&P 500 ending 0.8% higher, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.6%. America's listening to Fox News.
I'm Emily Campagno, host of the Fox True Crime Podcast. In October of 1994, 23-year-old Susan Smith alleged a black male carjacker kidnapped her 2 young sons. After a 9-day search, Smith revealed it was all a hoax, and she had killed her children. This week, State Representative Tommy Pope joins me to reflect on his prosecution of this infamous case in the year Susan Smith becomes eligible for parole. Available now on Apple, Spotify, and FoxNewsPodcasts.com.
Your favorite Fox News funny man, Jimmy Fallon, has a new book, The Cancel Culture Dictionary.
How have we not gotten a game show spinoff called Wheel of Cancel?
No, it's not an actual dictionary. It's an A to Z guide to winning the war on fun.
The fact that we're defunding the joke police is a win for America.
With a collection of cancellations by the outrage mob, Jimmy Fallon's Cancel Culture Dictionary.
Yo, what is going on in this country right now?
Order your copy of the Cancel Culture Dictionary now at foxnewsbooks.com.
Republicans taking the next step in impeaching a top Biden official. Fox's Ryan Schmelz with more.
Articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas will go through markup today, meaning it will have to pass out of the Homeland Security Committee before the full House can vote. Republicans like Texas Congressman August Pfluger argue Secretary Mayorkas hasn't followed the laws for securing the border.
When he has continually misled Americans about having operational control, about having a secure border, when we all know that that's false.
Democrats have accused Republicans of playing politics and not providing DHS with the resources it needs. On Capitol Hill, Ryan Schmelz, Fox News.
The man who pleaded guilty to releasing former President Trump's tax returns to the media has been sentenced to 5 years in prison. Fox's Jessica Rosenthal with more on that.
Former IRS contractor Charles Littlejohn apologized in court, saying he wanted to show how little the wealthy paid in tax. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison after pleading guilty to one count of unauthorized release of tax returns. Though thousands of other documents were released, other than former President Trump's taxes, including Florida Republican Senator Rick Scott's, he said outside court they were targeted because they were conservative and wealthy.
In a broad sense, every American is a victim here. Why? Because this case is part of the ongoing and dangerous corruption of the justice system at the federal level.
The federal judge said Littlejohn attacked democracy when he targeted a sitting president and that she had no words over the fact that he was charged with just one count. Jessica Rosenthal, Fox News.
The Pennsylvania Supreme Court says a lower court must indeed hear a challenge to the constitutionality of a decades-old state law that limits the use of Medicaid dollars to cover the cost of abortions. The High Court's majority saying Monday that prior court decisions did not fully consider the breadth of state constitutional protections against discrimination. The lawsuit brought by Planned Parenthood said the 1982 law unconstitutionally discriminates against poor women. I'm Ted Lindner, and this is Fox News.
The President's Corner.
President Biden is running for a second term, so it's not shocking that one who calls himself America's most pro-union president stood before members of the United Auto Workers and said,
"It's great to be home."
President Biden bolstered his pledge to support the growth of unions with his continued belief electric vehicles will revolutionize the automotive industry and that the U.S. needs to lead the way.
China's determined to dominate that market with EV predominantly made in China and Chinese jobs. The previous administration was content to sit in the sidelines and let China take all these jobs. But I won't let that happen.
But the president knows that getting 4 more years won't be easy and made no bones about that.
We have a big fight in front of us.
He says he's counting on auto workers to fight with him into November. Gernal Scott, Fox News.
Well, we're coming.